Life often brings us storms, whether it's a painful divorce, losing a job, or going through a time when hope feels far away. In those moments, we tend to think there's no way that good could come from the storm we're facing. But what if I told you that God can use even the hardest parts of our lives for a greater purpose? No matter what kind of storm you're going through, God is still in control, and He can use those trials to shape and strengthen you. We all want life to be smooth and easy, but the reality is storms are a part of life. The Bible never promises that life will be without trouble. In fact, it prepares us for hard times. Psalm 46:1 reminds us, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. This verse gives us hope. Even when we face situations that feel impossible, God is with us. He is our refuge, a place we can run to when the storms of life hit hard. He's not just watching from a distance. He's right there with us, walking through it by our side. Imagine the disciples in the middle of a storm on the Sea of Galilee. They were terrified of the water that was about to drown them. But then Jesus walked on that very water, showing His power over it. The waves they feared were under His feet. This is a picture of how Jesus handles the storms in our lives. The things that seem to overwhelm us are under His control. We might be scared, but He's not. He's triumphant over every storm, every trial, and every fear we face. When we go through storms, we tend to focus on how to get out of them as quickly as possible. We want the storm to end, and we pray for deliverance. But sometimes, God's plan isn't to immediately calm the storm. Sometimes His plan is to walk through it with us. And that's hard to understand because we expect God to just make everything better. Yet in those moments, He teaches us, shapes us, and strengthens us in ways we wouldn't have learned if everything had been easy. God has a purpose for every storm. The Bible is full of examples where bad things happen to good people, yet God uses those hard times for a greater plan. Look at King David. God had great plans for David, but before he became king, he was hunted down by Saul, who tried to kill him. Even though David was chosen by God, he still had to endure suffering. The same was true for prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, who faced hardships even though they were doing God's will. And yet through those trials, they grew closer to God and became the leaders they were meant to be. Storms have a way of refining us. Charles Spurgeon once said, "The Christian gains by his losses." What he meant is that even through sickness, loss, and defeat, a Christian comes out stronger. The worst things in life are like rough waves that push our ship toward home. This world is not our final home. We are on a journey toward heaven. The trials we face here are part of that journey, guiding us closer to our ultimate destination. So when you're in the middle of a storm, remember that it doesn't mean you've made a mistake or taken the wrong path. Sometimes the holiest path is not the smoothest. God may have led you into the storm by His divine plan because storms teach us important lessons. They teach us to trust in God even when we can't see the way forward. Sometimes in His good plan, bad things still happen. But that doesn't mean His plan for you isn't good. It just means that the road to that good might be more difficult than you expected. Think about this. God led the Israelites through the wilderness for 40 years before they reached the promised land. The journey wasn't easy, but it was part of God's plan. In the same way, the storm you're facing right now could be part of God's plan to prepare you for something greater. It might not feel like it in the moment, but God has a purpose, and He's using the storm to shape you into the person He's calling you to be. One of the most comforting promises in the Bible comes from Hebrews 13:5, where God says, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." No matter how dark or difficult the storm gets, you are never alone. There may be times when you feel like you can't see God, but He sees you. And it's more important that God sees you than that you can see Him. Even when you can't feel His presence, He's still there, guiding you through the storm. Sometimes God calms the storm, and sometimes He walks through it with us. Both are good. But often we expect God to just remove the storm, to make our problems disappear. When He doesn't, we can feel abandoned or confused. But maybe God's plan for your storm isn't to take you out of it, but to walk through it with you, teaching you along the way. Storms don't mean God has forgotten you. In fact, they may mean the opposite. God leads us through storms to teach us, to grow our faith, and to strengthen our relationship with Him. Isaiah 43:2 promises, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you." When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. God doesn't promise a life without storms, but He does promise that He will be with us through them. So if you're in the middle of a storm right now, don't lose heart. God is with you, guiding you towards something good, even if you can't see it yet. Trust Him in the storm. Trust that He's using it for your good. Sometimes it's not about avoiding the storm, but learning to walk through it with faith, knowing that God is by your side. He can handle your storm and He'll guide you through it safely.